Hi there. I'm late, 1 minute late. For me, that's a big deal. And I'm here, though. Like the sign says, I'm still sick. Less sick than last time. And I'm not particularly together, so I didn't remember how to do the live streaming thing. Oh god, this needs to be up here, doesn't it? Yeah. It's not going to be here for long, I'll tell you that. I didn't remember how to do the live streaming thing correctly, so it didn't start up properly because I didn't have the right key attached to it. And I finally did that, and I haven't arranged the windows, and I can start doing that now. Maybe like that. That might look nice. And I have to go and get my coffee. That's what I'm going to do. Hey, came back. I'm debating making your letters larger so I can read them. No matter, though. And this coffee is going to be too hot for a little bit. Also, no matter. I has come prepared with my notepads and the pen that's running out of ink and a brush pen, which is not, but which is really hard to use. So we'll see how this works out as far as spending some time with you. It looks to me like my levels are okay. So I'm going to scooch myself off the screen and settle in. And we're spending one less minute today because, as I expected, I got sick and my income went down. That is, what do they call it? That's gig economy for you. That is our modern technocratic world as defined by things like giant internet companies and stuff like that. And it's not Patreon being mean to me. They're not responsible for that. It's just that it's a response to the statistical average of people and stuff. And Bo's asking, how am I feeling? It's hard to not feel better than last week, I'll tell you. I did not manage to make a plugin. If people come and ask me that more, then I'll tell them the same thing. I didn't manage to make a plugin, but some of this other stuff I'm able to keep up with. So I can spend some time with you. I can probably answer questions about things. So I'll keep an eye out for that. And tell you how my week has been. And again, like with last week, I believe that I can sort of fire up my whole music thing. And the point of that is that since it is a algorithmic composition, it's like a self-playing synthesizer, it doesn't technically need me to be doing all of the playing of it. So tomorrow can be some bump and house music, and one of the things I can always do is to like rearrange that stuff, which I find soothing. So I'll do some of that. It'll make it easier to do Tuesday. And then one of the things people, somebody was asking, he said, like, sent me email saying, I love Neverland, give me API clips. So I was like, well, not right now, but that's coming. And some of those will be easier to do than tackling some of the more demanding stuff I have in the pipe. So I do have some things that I can sort of patiently grind away, and I'll get back to the doing plugins. One of the things that I was thinking about doing, and maybe I'll turn myself up so that I don't have to speak up as much. How's that? Does that work for us? I'm sure that's going to be loud enough, and I can even turn that up too. And yeah, as you might have heard, it's better for me to not be trying to raise my voice a lot at the moment. So we're gonna. This is ASMR Chris today, where it might actually sound sick. It might actually sound kind of Tom Waits or something, but we can be a little low key here. So I got a happy guy saying I love Baxendale and chorus ensemble. Good. I'm glad that you do. One of the things I'm going to have to grapple with at some stage is pulling off some kind of transition, because I've long gone past the point where simply putting out new plugins is super helpful and useful. I've long gone past the point when just putting out more plugins is super helpful and useful, because they're getting confusing and there's so many of them. Also, there's a bunch of stuff that I could be asked to do that has already come out, or stuff that I know that I've got, like I was being asked about a gate and I was saying digital black, and the response was, no, it's not. And I looked and I was like, you're right, it's not out yet. So that can be tacked on there. But once I'm finished, I'll have that. I'll have digital black. And, there's a limit to the usefulness of constantly throwing new tools at you. So it becomes more of a question of like, what are we trying to collectively do here? Think of it as me and you guys teaming up to accomplish a thing. So what thing is to be accomplished? Perhaps it's along the lines of giving people the ability to express music on their computers and having the technological tools to be able to make anything they are trying to make happen. Or maybe it's like we're inventing a new form of music, and so we are going to make a new sound that didn't exist before, or mostly didn't exist before. And that could be another goal. That could be another thing. It's like we're going to take DAWs and make them into a new form of DAW that gives you results that are different. Like some of the stuff that I'm doing in the rack stuff is not as easy for me to do in just only plugins alone. But if I was fortunate enough to scale up, or if we all transitioned over and started doing something like, I don't know, Godot Engine, or we started working with game engine stuff, and, or Blender or something like that, and learned those tools to begin pushing the boundaries of those and making scripts. Like you could think that plugins are like scripts to tack on to DAWs, and they make the sound of the DAWs do a thing that it didn't do before. And there's a lot of other stuff out there, some of it's free, that you could do things like that. And then the question becomes, what are we going to try to do? Now, Ahmed is asking a lot, am I doing all right? I'm doing better. I'm doing kind of better. I have not bounced back completely. If I had, I would have a plugin. But there are some other reasons also why I wasn't able to do that. Me being just me and not having anybody else here, when stuff comes up, I have to go and attend to it, rather than being able to just focus on the work. I have to do all of the things. And that's common for like lots of people. That's one of the things that I feel like keeps me connected to normal humans in 2020, is that in a lot of ways I'm living that life. So I was running out of heating oil and too sick to consistently keep a wood stove going, because that involves carrying a bunch of firewood, and that would just wear me out. And the going and getting more heating oil meant I had to go out, so I had to bundle up real good and make sure that I wasn't just getting myself more sick. And there was another thing that happened that was along the same lines, in that I had some family obligations. And in a way they were like, nice. And also lots of mention of ginger root. I did go and get ginger, although not literally ginger root, but I also got something that was kind of neat, which was ginger medallions. So in a sense, I got ginger candy. It was a snacky candy that you could get, and reasonably cheap compared to how that kind of thing usually runs. And they were softer than I expected. I thought they were going to be real chewy. And nomming on that stuff means just obliterating yourself with ginger, and that seemed about right. And I also got more of the sort of cut and sifted ginger stuff, which would make good tea, although I have yet to make tea out of it, so maybe that'd be a good thing. Oh, hang on guys, I need to fix the chat. It is up here. Live chat. The YouTube won't let me type the word. I should be able to chill that out. I'm not sure whether jiha means good or bad, but it was basically candied ginger. And that was a way of eating large chunks of ginger at a sitting. I don't normally do much of that. I tend to stay away from candy because one of the things I have to do health-wise is keep my weight down and not eat sugary things. But I counted it as an exception because it was eating big chunks of ginger. Yeah, my regret, Kevin, I'm happy that people can think of me as Catman. I have no cats left because they were old and they died of natural causes more than a year ago. So there will be no further cats. But yeah, that was always a very sweet little thing about that. Tea is good too. I'm wondering whether I'm evolving away from drinking so much coffee, Because some of the stuff that I also do, like I'm part of a recovery process thing, and it's getting me into stuff that I really kind of explored over the last weekend because I had family obligations. And the okay, noted. So yeah, maybe not so much, but I had or chose to visit my sister down in Pennsylvania, which is all part of that whole estate thing that when my folks passed away, and I had a lot of responsibilities to deal with there, and that's all still underway. And one of the neat things about it, there are a couple of things. I drove down to Pennsylvania with my brother, who had had a stroke a little while back, so he badly needed my help with that. And he also needed my help because a previous time that he'd gone down there, he got in a fight with my sister and was pretty dismayed. He thought that she was like, never darken my door again, which was not true. She got over it. But he kind of needed my company there because I could be trusted to, let me see. Don't mind me, I'm fooling with some things to adjust. There we go. He kind of needed my company there because otherwise he'd be going and hanging out with her, but he'd be scared that she'd flip out, because he's a lot like me, has sometimes difficulties in interpreting social stuff, and the two don't always get along. But we got together, we talked about some of that sort of business-oriented stuff, and we played a crazy board game, and that was kind of fun. And all in all, it went nicely, although it cost me, because that's a lot of driving. That's like many hours of driving. And I was just getting back into being well. And the commitments of dealing with these people wore me out completely. Like, there's no brain left after some of that stuff. I'm spending too much time around them, and Dan only talks about the food he's eating, and I actually have trauma issues around stuff like that, so it was a very painful conversation to be trapped in the car with for 2 hours. And I got through it anyhow, and back home I came, and here I am. But it ties into my recovery stuff, because it's looking like I'm going to need to go through this process that has sort of evolved recently. People have gotten into this thing recently where they've come up with a way to address some real specific kinds of traumatic behavior. And I have stuff like that around, I guess you could call it fear of dogs, fear of food, and fear of groups of people of just about any size. Like one-on-one with people, I'm fine. Being on the internet is kind of special because I'm completely alone, and yet I'm with you guys at the same time. But there are a lot of other situations that have colored the way my life has worked out. It's like made me Chris from Airwindows, that I was rendered pretty much unfunctional, couldn't do anything or handle anything, and all I could do was stay at home and tinker with audio stuff. And so I had that, and I put more value on it as a basis of that. And then there comes a time when it's like, okay, you mastered the audio stuff and you still don't have a life, now what do you do? So I'm going to be looking into this trauma therapy stuff, which I've seen somebody who also had equally or more harsh stuff that I did, go through it and find it real liberating. And there's some things I need to address that would be improved by coping with this stuff. But then it becomes a question of like, you're no longer afraid of dogs, like at all. Now what? And it's probably not going to be, now I have to go out and get a dog. You're no longer panicking when you're around people eating food and making mouth noises, or afraid that you're making noises while you're doing it. If that happened, I would no longer have issues, you know, akin to almost like an anorexic grade level of issues around eating food around people. And a lot of things would change, and a lot of things would get easier with that, because that has ruined many things in my life over the years. And if it becomes a thing of like, you are no longer, and it builds up over a while. So like after a couple of days of dealing with people nonstop, I can't necessarily face a big group of people. Like go into a restaurant, sit with your back towards all the people, and I'm in a constant panic because psychologically, my brain's constantly trying to figure out whether every single person in the room is like attacking me or paying attention to me. And it's unbearable. It's unbearable. You could call it social anxiety. Lots of people deal with this kind of stuff for, I think, probably similar reasons. They went through some stuff and their brain got kind of twisted or broken and it went that way. So if it touches upon the kinds of things, and I am going to look at the scroll back, by the way, guys. It touches on the kinds of things where, like, if my life as Chris of Airwindows was set up by being able to spend all this time working on this technical stuff, what happens if I'm not compelled to isolate myself in order to like stay alive, and I still have the technical stuff? Or like, if, you know, like, do I go like, okay, I've done this and I also want to be an animator. Why do you want to be an animator? One, because I want to bring stuff to life. I'm fascinated by the technology. You know, I've got a book like Disney Animation, The Illusion of Life. I grew up around that and it was like, wow, this is amazing. And also my family members valued it, and I was desperate to do things that my family members appreciated. So it's like, okay, so I'm extra interested in that. That might go away. But if the draw for being an animator is also like, well, this is something that I can excel at that requires that I'm alone all the time. Well, what if I changed to such a way that I no longer wanted to be alone all the time? What if I wanted to go out and meet you guys and like make up some kind of Airwindows con or something like that and spend time working with people? What if I was spending time like mixing with people, or was in a band or something, or came up with a way to be in a band with people over the internet so that, you know, I can, and David Pixley is constantly wanting me to do that because he has a band that he'd like me to join. What if it became much easier to do that? That might change the direction with which I address some of these things. So that becomes interesting. And my last weekend was very strongly affected by all that. Like, I was talking about some of those things. I was experiencing some of it. There's many lessons I've learned. Me and my brother Dan, who is the one who is capable of walking me through stuff like learning me to do VST GUI. And I had a bunch of interesting conversations with Dan because he is trying to figure out how I think and do things. And the White Sea's not available. If he was, he'd be able to come and play Minecraft with me. I'm now doing that. I didn't wait for him. Any of you can come and join me as well. We've been doing that. A new person who knew about my Airwindows stuff joined us last time, and we played with somebody who was just watching the Minecraft, and like, oh, cool, yeah, I like to play Minecraft. And it's like, sure, okay, come today. Come and play with us. If you're watching this, you can be on this screen. So come and join us. And they did. And that's kind of what I had in mind. I like the breaking of boundaries thing that way. Like, you don't necessarily have to be the audience. If you're watching, I will happily tell you what to log on to over the stream and walk you through it, and you will be there with us. And you can continue joining us and be there next week and the week after and the week after if you like, because that's kind of what that's about. It's not about Minecraft being that special as a game. It's about kind of like this with you guys, of I can spend some time and just kind of let people come along, and I'm still exploring what that means. I'm still exploring how that works. So let me have a look at some of the scroll back where we got that. Also remember, if you do highlight me by going at Airwindows, it is easier for me to see it. So, oh yeah, Happy Guy is talking about exposure. That's one of the things that I do sort of as an experiment in life. My life is an experiment of what happens if you just do the thing and don't spend your time running out. And in a way, this probably makes a lot of sense. Like, it's an experiment of what happens when you just do the thing and you don't go running out and constantly interacting with people and trying to sell them on who you are. If you don't do that marketing thing that is considered to be either indispensable or the only thing that matters. So it gives me the freedom to be very snarky about stuff like that. Like people annoyed by cheesy advertising, I get to be the opposite of that. And I also get to be a test case as like, you know, does that matter? Like, if you hate advertising, okay, here's a guy who's doing no advertising. Did he survive? And the answer is I kind of have. And there is it's like once you get into it, you go, whoa, this is really cool. Look at all of this stuff that I can have. And I get to talk to the person. Sometimes he does things that I ask, and sometimes he doesn't do things that I ask him to do. And, you know, it's enough to keep people around. Like, I don't have people getting into Airwindows and they're going, no, I decided that you sucked, and leaving very often. Often they're like, I wish I could help you more. And I'm like, no, don't worry about it. Because it's also part of the non-advertising thing. Like I can't have my motivation be must get more money from people's. The motivation always has to be think of something else to be motivated about. And there's a number of reasons. I talked about the trauma stuff, and part of that is because I'm compelled. Certainly I have been compelled to come up with a different way of doing things because I'm not capable of living a life where I start off by doing my own marketing and going out and confronting lots of people who don't know who I am and don't know why they should give me money and tell them to. You know, that can even be in many ways an acceptable thing to say to people because, like, hey, capitalism. So you go out and say, here's why you should give me money, and then you explain what you're going to do for them. And you know, that's fine. It's cool. There's even elements of that get incorporated into what I do, but because of the trauma around people, and yeah, like when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, when I was like going to college for the less than 1 year that I survived that, it was so bad that I couldn't see other people like at all. I was acting like, you know, Hampshire College and the Amherst 5 college system was the frickin' Viet Cong. Like crawling through the jungle, avoiding seeing any people. It was a specter of somebody looking really disturbed. And I got away with it because it was a hippie college and everybody was crazy and on drugs there. But, you know, it was not something that I could do. And it continued to not be something that I could do. So everything that I've done since then has had to be within a context of like, okay, lock myself in a box and now what do I do with the rest of my life? And, yeah, so contacted the usual free VST blogs, like Bedroom Producer's blog has listed my stuff. It's just that they don't necessarily list my stuff every week. There are forums where I get to post a new product alert thing, and that's KVR and Gear Sluts, which is by far the largest one. And to the extent that I'm allowed to do that, and that I don't screw stuff up, and there are some conversations that I get into, like the infinite dither conversation in the high-end forum on Gear Sluts, that I get to interact. If I'm in conversations, I don't get to shill from my plugins because that's one of the rules. But if I have a new plugin, and I get to have a plugin like every week, then I get to post a new product thing. And so I get to appear there without going and persuading people that they should cover me. And then it becomes, it's like those are the parameters under which Airwindows can function, and then you wait and see what happens. And turns out what happens is very slow, steady growth on like the Patreon. And when I was selling things individually, wild, unpredictable, month by month income with stuff that succeeded and stuff that failed, and it forced me to do things in terms of doing like popular styles of plugins, and there's only so many that you can do, so that turned out to be actually a negative. It turned out to be not actually a good way of me doing Airwindows. So I'm keeping an eye on the chat, because the thing is, it is moving, and I like that. But I do want to address everything to the extent that I can. Yeah, KVR seems to like me pretty well, because I meet their moral standards. And there are very few people who can do that. I do manage to meet their moral standards because I am not a big old capitalist marketing machine. I'm like the opposite. And it's not really possible to be a huge business success while also being the opposite. But I can survive while being the opposite. And so they tend to respond fairly well. Ahmed has a very personal question that's about to scroll off the top. Have you ever felt like music is boring and all you can do is the same repeating things over and over again? After hearing music for countless hours in trot. I'm not sure quite how trot has to do with it, but I'm assuming you mean like your music, or that you're exposed to kinds of music, or anything along those lines where it's just killing your enjoyment for it. And I have some thoughts on that subject. And in fact, it touches on how I'm doing plugins and how that works. The way I feel about that, there have been many occasions in like my hardware and my music development where, I play guitars. I think somebody mentioned something about wanting to ask about my guitars. Absolutely do that. If there's anything about instruments that you want to know why I chose what I chose or what I did, that's a conversation I can easily have. It doesn't tend to come up, and that's interesting to me as well. But I have done things like, I am a guitar player, so I'll sometimes get guitar stuff. You can get things like guitar preamps and things. There was a time when I picked out a particular guitar preamp. It's a Engel, and there's a rack mount thing. And I've had rack mount stuff like I've got here for a long time now. And I was setting myself up with the guitar stuff that was maybe going to be a little easier to handle. And I didn't have the speaker isolation cabinet that I built now, which I've got over here under the... You probably can't see it. No, you won't be able to see it. So I had to do DI stuff, and I was trying to figure out how to do that. And I got this Engel 530 something or other. It's a rack mount preamplifier, and it gave me high gain sounds of a quality I didn't have before. Like I was able to dial it in and get stuff in that sort of Mesa-y style tonality where the saturation was very high, and the I could do more detailed things with the EQ because the EQ was a lot more sophisticated. Turns out that the sounds I was able to get with that were not that much like the sounds I'm kind of after in my head. Like if you're thinking about metal-y style sounds and sounds of bands with guitars and distortion and stuff. I'm very into some of the metal type stuff. Sometimes, like there is a you're going to have to forgive me for being all intuitive and bouncing all over the map. There's a YouTuber called Lindsay Ellis that likes doing film reviews and reviews of cinema type stuff, and I think she's awesome. I've met her once. I met her at PatreCon 2 years ago, and that was real cool. And she was doing videos on the Game of Thrones as it finished up, which was super interesting because I'm very interested in storytelling. In fact, that's something where I did a really deep dive over the years, because one of the ways historically that I've been able to cope with being like absolutely and totally isolated and never seeing other human beings is writing them myself, telling myself stories about them. And then it's like there's a little bit more of a feeling of a company, because I'm thinking about like, what's this character gonna do in this next chapter? And so I'm like thinking about something other than just the stuff that I want. Instead, it's getting a little more complicated, and that's one of the things that can help you keep from getting really lonely and stuff. And as such, I get really fascinated by storytelling and very interested in how that works, and it draws me towards wanting to know more about animation, wanting to know more about stuff like that. And Lindsay talks about things like the Game of Thrones finale, and was very good about explaining why it was terrible, because it didn't end well. And there was this shot that she kept returning to. It's one of the people where you have good editing and cut to all of these different scenes and things. That's typically not how I've approached stuff. But she would cut to characters that were going through terrible things or whatever, and it would all go red, and the soundtrack of her video would go, just one of those, and that's the first bars of the Limp Bizkit song Break Stuff. So I was hearing it over and over again, this nu metal sound that's very like the Engel thing we were talking about, and very like heavy metal type stuff, just presented as there's only the guitar and then there's a snippet of voice, and she cuts away because it's a sample and she can only do so much. And that's an example of the heavy guitar metal type stuff. But when I go to things that I like myself, I will typically go more to like the band King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard, which is like a 60s garage psych rock maniacal stuff. They have touched on heavy metal too, by the way, but some of their best things have been in the form of this really primitive, raw sounding stuff. And also the evergreens things that I've been doing. When I get another one of those done, most likely the next one that I do is going to be Rolling Stones' Let It Bleed. And there's a reason for that. That is an example of a bunch of heavy guitar stuff that is in fact distorted and it's super loud, and the composite sound of the band is huge and muscular and powerful. It's difficult to get better rock and roll than classic Rolling Stones. But the gain structure is completely and totally different. And the difference between like that Limp Bizkit, Mesa, Engel type high gain stuff and the King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard and or old school Rolling Stones distorted stuff is the difference between me being inspired in the music that I'm making versus me not being inspired by the music that I'm making because I'm consciously trying to do something that doesn't really turn me on. And that takes us back to Ahmed's question, which was, what do you do when your music bores you and you seem to be doing the same thing over and over again and it's not interesting? the answer to me is figuring out what you're doing that is not meeting your standards. Like, I started doing the live jams, and I did those for like a solid year, and only ran into trouble when I started trying to add, and if you think about it, like I told you about trauma type stuff, the difference between the music jams and adding evergreens to it is a difference in positioning with myself versus like the rest of the world. The music jams were very much like, hey, I'm not even looking at the camera. You can watch me as I do this. You can criticize, but you might get a complete cold shoulder. You say, you're playing wrong notes. And I'm like, oh, I play what I feel. And then I wind up playing even more wrong notes. And, or, oh, this is really grating. And my response typically would be like, you can't help you. And then doing another track that was intentionally even more grating, because it was about exploring what my improvisational side, what my, put myself into a musical situation and then do stuff responsive to that towards some kind of end. And the difference between that and composition gets to be like, are you responding to the music as it is going by, or are you trying to aim towards an audience, like marketing? Are you going out there and going like, this is going to be romantic music for film viewers, and I'm writing to score. So when the hero and the heroine get together and they look longingly into each other's eyes, and I'm composing music to go along with that, there's a right and a wrong answer. And I'm going to put myself in the situation where this is me, I'm making music, and it has to be what you thought was appropriate. The music jam was never like that. It was always like, okay, these synthesizers are making some noises. Here's a guitar, here's another synthesizer, here's this and that and the other stuff. What can I add to this? And I would get up to stuff like, for a while there, I had my MIDI verbs connected into each other in such a way where I have two aux sends, and this is the kind of thing that you could do on DAWs if you set them up well, or if you had them set up right, where I've got one aux send and it goes to a reverb, and then I've got another aux send and it goes to a reverb that feeds the previous reverb, so it's two layers of it. But I also had a little jumper cable in there that I'd forgot that I'd put in. I just experimented with it and it worked. Where the reverb's input is a stereo input, but it's all wet, so it doesn't matter. It's just like literally use either one of these inputs and you'll never notice the difference. So I had that for the bass reverb, and I would send the input into one side and then it's full wet, so it doesn't care. And I would send the other reverb into the input of the thing, and again, it ends up becoming mono, doesn't matter. That left me a spare input and a spare output on the deeper reverb, the one that's behind the other reverb. And what I did was I crossfed it. I took the spare output and I patched it into the input of itself. So I basically took an Alesis MIDI verb, the old school one with the RCA jacks and no controls other than a single wet dry, and I cross-patched it. I made it so that its output fed back into its input again, and that's how I got the infinite sustain thing I had going for a while there. I did it, and then I forgot I did it, and I was like, this is what it sounds to have two layers of reverb. No. This is what it sounded like to have a reverb feeding back on itself, and then also behind another reverb with the same setting. And I could run like the Rhodes into that and just have these infinite ambient spaces. And I got some folks here today who like me doing ambient spaces, again, that gets into the kind of thing where if I'm too responsive to people telling me what to do, I start panicking. It start acting like people in crowds, and it doesn't work for me. But I'm very curious about what people like. So hitting on like the ultimate deep field reverb space sound is pleasing to me. That's also what happened with the SRS. When I bought a Crate SRS system from a guy, the purpose, of course, is for me studying it and making seriously better. And it seems like that's going to be possible, because it seems like this thing has a lot of side boost on tap that I'm not taking into account. That, like, by nature, the things that it does, it wants to just go all side all the time. And there's more experimenting I need to basically get used to it and learn what it is, and then go back into the plugin. And then, you know, I lost my train of thought. I lost stuff. Let me go and look at some more talk again. Honestly, I'm not sure whether to chalk that up to being sick or chalk that up to just me being me. And there's not a lot I could do about that, because that's another thing I trained myself to do, was bounce around intuitively. And that is the point where it becomes difficult, because I'm chasing some train of thought out. And I can keep talking and I can keep connected to it, but then I might lose where I was at. And it's bad for me to drink so much coffee that I can keep all of the thoughts at once. I need to operate on more of a human level, where I'm not hurting myself doing it. That's something also that needs to evolve. So yeah, let's see now. People are talking about schooling and things. And yeah, getting bored of music is understandable. But again, I said, like, if you're trying to shape your thing into something that's not appropriate for you just because you can, that can lead to music fatigue very easily. That's what happens to me. Monitoring the sound of subs affected by my speaker system. I'm being asked for a plugin that I might do, which will just distort lows in such a way that you can hear them in small speakers easier. Monitoring subs is all about reaching equal volumes for slew-only regular sound and subs, or at least not producing stuff that's wildly out of whack. You should be able to, at least in my notion of how this works, you should be able to cut in subs, and it might not sound right to you, but the levels should not go away completely and not be completely 100% distort. It's a level check thing. Same with slew only. Slew only should be a level check thing. Like, it shouldn't be clipping if you go to slew only, because that would be too bright. But it also shouldn't be buried, and it shouldn't sound horrible when you switch to slew only. Airwindows ban. We'll see how things develop. One of the ways to do that is catch up with me when I'm doing the Minecraft thing, and we'll all just hang out, because that's something that I consider necessary. If you're going to do a creative process, you also have to have a little social community together. It can't be just you only me to do the thing. And I mean, it can. That worked for the Pixies, but then they like frickin' broke up. So what do you want? In some ways, you have to be able to have the fundamental sort of animal nature of this is your little pack, and you get together and spend time rather than just doing the purpose of the thing. I feel that's very important. Yeah. Peaks only, cool. I'm glad that somebody is enjoying that, because that was hard work getting that done, and that's also unusual. Nobody else has anything quite like peaks only. It should help everything translate. That's the whole point. Thank you for appreciating it. And that's why monitoring is going to become part of the kits that I put together as far as necessary stuff. And I'll be doing long, extensive videos showing you how they're done and covering how that stuff is worked. And that will end up happening. Do you still prefer 22 fret over 24 fret? Mostly it's been Strat styles, honestly. I have that one incredibly beat up Telecaster. It has magic crappy pickups on it. I bought it for very cheaply because it's got that kind of old Telecaster pickup that's all like the windings are coming loose and stuff, and it's very microphonic, and it has the nastiest like King Gizzard old school rock distortion tone. Like that bright yellow guitar is all of the raunch in the world for doing hard rock guitar sounds. Flip it on the bridge pickup and so that's a kind of a secret weapon, but you'd never be able to steal it and sell it as such, because everybody would look at it and be like, that's a complete piece of garbage, and they plug it in to like some modern transistor amplifier or some Craters thing, and they'd play it and go, that sounds like a piece of garbage, and then they wouldn't know the context. So sometimes that's what I like, is having gear that does the magic thing for me, but there's nothing boutique about it. Like, you couldn't yoink it out of my system and go, haha, I got it, and then steal it and run it over to something and sell it, because nobody else can get the value out of it. It's a functional value. Yeah. Elohim is going into strange psychological states. There are no other human beings. No, I tended to refer to people out there as like possible threats, and that is damage. That is basically just a kind of abuse history that wasn't super prevalent to the point where I lived my entire life forced to cope with that at face value. Instead, it changed my behavior in the world around me just enough that I started becoming a really unusual, eccentric type of person, but then not so much that people were compelled to go and find out what was wrong with me and fix it. And it's just, life is weird. Life is weird sometimes. Les Paul or Gibson market dying off after their bankruptcy. Yeah, it's weird that the way that works out. It's also good for new stuff to happen, though, so there's that. A music genre called I Don't Care If You Like It or Not. Yeah, I grew up on Frank Zappa. That's part of what I liked so much, is it was clearly so odd that he didn't care whether I liked it or not, but I was able to follow it, and the dissonance really spoke to me emotionally. And yep, and also Zappa's approach to music was intentionally offensive. He would do stuff like on the Them or Us album, and I got to get a copy of that on vinyl again someday. I used to have it, I don't have it any longer. And it's a great like 80s Zappa thing. Big old double album with a wild variety of amazing stuff on it. And there's an instrumental called Sinister Footwear 2. I'm pretty sure that's that one. It's certainly a Sinister Footwear, but it might be Sinister Footwear 2. And it's like 11 minutes of just brain melting, like FM synthesizers and heavy guitars and just all of this stuff. And it's orchestrated to within an inch of its life, but it's all rock instrumentation and it's all synth instrumentation. And it's just doing all these insanely cool things. There's this French horn thing with a intense like acid synthesizer resonant overtone, but it's a resonant overtone that's being done in FM, so it sounds totally different. It's like a whole texture, completely unlike anything else on the track, and it just pokes out, and it works itself up to a culmination and is followed by truck driver divorce. It's very sad. And he does the song, Truck Driver Divorce, and sequenced it in such a way that the amazing musical feat of Sinister Footwear 2 is followed by the dumbest country song that he could possibly do. And that's on purpose. That's part of the larger artwork, that he's undermining himself with that stuff. But he's not undermining himself with that stuff because he likes that too. But it's funny to him, and life and society and stuff is funny to him and not worth taking seriously. And there are reasons behind that as well. Like part of the reason Zappa was so sour and cynical and stuff was he had his own like weird abusive childhood. You read his books, his autobiography stuff is amazing. And he ended up marrying a woman who was really challenging. Like challenging to the degree of when I married and then ended up divorcing. I picked somebody who was very challenging because they seemed to be appropriate for me at the time, and I didn't realize how much I had to heal about myself in order to be okay. So I had to pick somebody that was a perfect match to incredibly not okay. I successfully did that, but wow, it was intense and scary. And he married Gail, and lived in shifts where he would be awake when she was asleep, and then and so on. And he lived on the road, and he stayed away as much as he could. And they raised children, and they're very interesting children, but Gail like played the children against each other and was very competitive for Frank's attention and was very competitive for all things, and just a challenging person. Moon Zappa wrote a piece on Mother's Day once that's like heartbreaking, but also really gets to you. And it really spoke to me because I had a mother who was not nearly like Gail Zappa, but was also a challenging person in her own right. And mine was just very demanding. Like you have to be amazing. You have to be perfect about so many things, because she came from a position of being so threatened that she didn't feel safe like anywhere with anything. And so her kid had to be perfect or terrible things might happen. And so Frank's musical creation was driven by some of this stuff as well. So often the stuff that we have that is special is scar tissue, comes out of stuff. So never fear your scar tissue. But it's also worth learning how to be well and honoring what you gained through the scar tissue. It's really challenging following this chat. I'm going off on tangents. And again, since I'm sick today, still better, but I'm still in the recovery process. I think maybe it's all a process of learning to, maybe that's what it's going to become. It's like, okay, Monday chat is people desperately trying to follow what I'm talking about, because their questions send me off on all of these tangents about things, and I, I'll make a good hard try to tie things together so that it comes back to what you were asking about. But you got to go with me on these journeys sometimes. And Zappa, with inventing the genre of I don't care if you like it or not, that is an abstraction. That's different from like I want to be good at the Engel heavy guitar thing because people seem to like that. What must I do for people to seem to like? It's my music jamming is more along the lines of how can I make sonic events happen in space and respond appropriately to those. And that is strongly schooled by Zappa. And the more of it that I can do, the better. And that's why making the computer play itself is really important to that project. And the more of it that I can do, the easier Tuesdays are. Like the better the Tuesdays work, and the more impressive the more impressive performance I can get out of it, the easier it is for me to do. The harder the performance is on Tuesdays, the harder it is to get stuff out of these, where they just sit, like I used to have the bank of Arturia key steps, and they just would not respond properly. And I could make them all transposed together, but then that's not within a key, that's not musically sensible. So it would just make it harder to follow. And they would get stuck, and have a note stuck on, and it would just play the note, and it would compel me to be like, okay, what must I do musically to fit with the fact that this note, which is a wrong note, has been playing for the last 3 minutes? And I would be trying to respond to that stuff, but it wouldn't sound good to me, and it would be harder. And when the music is going in such a way where it's coming up with stuff to play, with its little random structures, that's interesting, and that I can respond to, then I can typically respond real quickly to that, and it'll sound good to people. It'll sound impressive to people when I go to a note and then the chord went to the same note, and it's like I stop because it's like, wow, that was great, great moment. But it sounds like I meant to do that. It sounds like, and now we all go to this together magically, boom, and then change to something else. Similarly for the density, and not the plugin density, but the density of the composition. Zappa talked about balancing stuff out compositionally. Like you have, like making a Calder mobile, you have a massive, super heavy, dense stuff, like heavy guitars or musically complicated, lots of notes happening, and you balance it against empty space, less of a tempo, and less notes happening, and the little cluster of dense stuff is balanced against other stuff over here, and that's why he's doing it. And that's why when he's like doing Them or Us, he does the overwhelming Sinister Footwear 2, but follows it immediately with the Dumb Cheesy Country song, because it's part of his larger composition. He's balancing stuff against other stuff. And he said in his autobiography, like, here, I'll compose stuff for you. That's what I do. I compose stuff. I do this musical stuff, and then we can like do a Donnie and Marie Hawaiian Punch commercial as part of the end composition for this. Or we'll do like Weasels Hurt My Flesh, and that's an old album of his, in which part of it is people goofing around on stage, or everybody feeds back at once and it's this blast of deafening noise. It's all grist for the mill. It's all just stuff that he does. And that's the interesting part, and that's also part of what I try to do with this. And if I can bring it into the plugin zone, I'll do that too. Where you got these things going, but I need to have stuff built into it where it will stop. I got a DivKid switch set, and some of my most fundamental things like kick drums and hats and such are wired through that, so I can have it all on, but I can hit a switch instantly and now the bass or the hat are out. Or I can push it the other direction, momentary switch back into the bass and things. And that gives me instantaneous control over major mix elements, where I can do a thing and then like, okay, I think this needs to sit out for a second, boop, and then it's gone. Rather than having to go into the sequencer, which is an Erica Synth sequencer, go to the mute section, hit the mute section, and take one of the tracks out. I'm better off actually making all the tracks do different kinds of beats and then plugging into the holes as I see fit, because I'll be able to see them flashing. And they'll all sort of be on the surface level, rather than needing to remember what lies under the menu system. And you go to the mutes, and once you've gone to the mutes, you can see which ones aren't playing, but until you've gone to the mute section, you're not seeing which tracks are not on. And the physical switch thing that I'm doing is more like immediately graspable. And the level beyond that is like taking the digital clock kit that I built. I think I've shown that on stream before. It's over there, so I ain't getting it at the moment. But the digital clock thing, where individual LEDs on a digital clock face that says, like, 0 or 3 or whatever, the individual LEDs that make up that number turn on and off in a pattern. And that's what, I do have this within reach. So I worked out what the pattern was, and this is the pattern. This is a tens place and this is a ones place. They're the same pattern though. And one of my goals, one of the things I need to do with my system is make something like this work. So I have numbers that are just telling the time. Like, you know, it's telling this is the minute's hand, you know, and then I can plug something in knowing that this particular filter setting or having this track be on or not. It'll stay on until like this point, at which point it'll be off for 30 minutes, and then it'll be on for 30 minutes, and then it'll be off for 30 minutes. You pick this, you know, the F setting, and that will sort of compose because it's wiring the system up to a clock where the thing will be turning on or off based on the clock that I plugged it into. And then when I'm playing along with stuff, it might get to the point where that element is taken out of the composition. I didn't do it, but I can respond to it. And the more that I've got stuff like that, like say, look at this period over here. If we've got 3 different things being muted or turned on according to the, or a bunch of different things being muted or turned on according to this point, if black is on and white is off, you'll go to this point, you'll even be able to tell when it's coming because it's going to be a point in a specific number sequence. These are not random. There will be a point when 1, 2, 3, 4 things drop out of the mix. And one of them stays out for half an hour, and 3 more of them just drop out for a second. And then they'll come back, but one of the ones that was still there will drop out, being this one. And these are sort of like arrangement type things. They could be applied to anything, but they're part of that system where the improvisational thing comes together. And the more of that I build into the music jam, the more of that I build into the music stuff, it makes it easier on me to cooperate with a larger structure that's doing interesting things, because it's not all on me thinking of this stuff. And it also takes some of the pressure off as far as like thinking of like if I'm hung up on thinking, would dropping 4 things out of this mix be what people would like? And I'm working really hard on trying to decide something like that. That's going to be more stressful for me because I tend to panic when I worry about what people think. But if the synthesizer is going to do that anyhow, and I just have to, you know, playing an instrument, respond to that, or maybe go and fiddle with some other knobs of things, then that is easy because it's like, well, it ain't my fault. It's the clock's fault. The clock did that. So my job is to do something interesting around it. And then we're kind of jamming with what the clock does. And the end result can be like, wow, that was an amazing thing, because it's the combination of large-scale orchestrational and arrangement stuff that is just a artifact of how the synthesizer works, and human involvement in highlighting that. Being able to respond quickly like a jazz player to what's happening in the environment, but also like a synthesizer player, where responding quickly to what's happening in the environment, maybe you're going to make the duration of some notes become really short. Maybe you're going to do something else. Maybe your notes are going to become very dissonant. Maybe the notes are, you've just cut out some things that were being dissonant, and you happen to have stuff that's harmonious left in the mix. So everything that you touch suddenly is directed towards being harmonious, and that's a big arrangement change that might really please people or might be exciting to people. But part of it happened because the clock just did that. You're just responding to what the thing does. And that's interesting too. I need to scan so that I can answer some of these questions as I lost the scroll back and started talking about stuff. It's the risk that you run, is spending time with me in this way. That was all the music genre called I Don't Care If You Like It or Not. This is also part of how you make the music genre of I Don't Care If You Like It or Not, is choose stuff that does stuff without regard to, like, is this note the nice note? You go like, okay, no, is this note the blue note? Is this note the green note? And make up a sort of game around it and run with that. That's another way of handling that kind of thing. Why does a VGA to HDMI cable doesn't work? The VGA to HDMI cable could only work if you reprocessed the video into an HDMI feed, because the HDMI feed is too different. It's like going, why does a photographic slide not work as a JPEG? It's talking too different of a language. That's why it doesn't work. How am I coming along with Reaper? I still use Reaper every time I do a plugin thing. One of the next stages with my interaction with Reaper and with all of this stuff involves me doing these music jams as such that I keep doing, but capturing in multitrack rather than just capturing the mixdown. When I capture in multitrack, I'll have whatever that jam is, but I'll also have the capacity to further track things like guitars and basses and stuff onto there, and have a completely different kind of, like Ahmed keeps looking for the hard rock type stuff. I've done things like that before. Usually I run into arrangement problems, but I've done things like that before. And that'll be when that happens. And when I have multi-track recordings, that's when using Reaper as a multi-track mixdown in the Airwindows system becomes a thing. And that's when you start seeing, and it might be much like some of this other stuff, it's starting to become like, okay, I have to concentrate on a major thing a week, plus all this live stuff. So something that's that worked out would have to take up my whole week. I wouldn't be able to do a plugin on a week when I was also doing a complete mixdown in the box using Airwindows stuff on a multi-track thing that I tracked in for the purpose of doing it, with the purpose of coming out with a finished song and also a set of videos that people could watch and see how I did it and what choices I made around it. So there's a bunch of stuff that goes into that. And it would have to be including stuff like you'd have to be able to see the Reaper screen. My plugin stuff doesn't involve showing the Reaper screen as much, so there's a lot of things involved with that. Reaper will go. Reaper will end up continuing to be a thing, although so many people are into Logic that honestly I might not be able to completely give up on Logic. I might end up just being like, fine, here, have your 60 billion gigs of Apple loops. Enjoy using up my hard drive uselessly, which pisses me off enormously. And just firing it up because I do have familiarity with it. And there's a lot of people who are using Logic for things. There's people who are using Logic for composing. Like there's this guy, the guy behind Spitfire Audio, like the marketing guy behind Spitfire Audio who does all these videos. He's a good video maker. Sometimes it seems like that's all he is. But he's a composer. He does really do composing. As far as the video making, you often don't hear much about the samples, but he's going to like Trondheim in Norway or something like that for making the video. The thing about that is he is composing in Logic because a lot of composers in MIDI find Logic so much better than anything else that they have to do that. And he's using some monster Hyper Mac to do that with. And then he's running through that and through an elaborate multi-stage port system into Pro Tools and mixing there. So, yeah. So there's the thing. Logic could actually come back. I don't want to abandon Reaper because I think Reaper is kind of more important and it's more accessible. and I like the way that it allows things to be simple, and I like how modular and extensible it is, but I'm nowhere near being able to extend it or modularize it myself. So there's that, you know. But I do like the fact that that's a thing that is super available. Primus and Les Claypool are a good, also Zappa-ish kind of thing. Les Claypool, bass player from Primus. And I don't know how much scroll back we got, but we probably got some. Stuff zips around. I'll do my best with it. Plugins, audio, music. Oh, Zappa died the same year Ahmed was born. I never saw him in concert, and that's a great shame, because I was always a fan. But like me going to concerts, understandably, that's going to be a kind of a hard deal. It would be very hard for me to do. Oh, Ahmed, I'm going to argue with you about one thing. Ahmed is talking dirt about Ringo. The thing about Ringo Starr is he was a hell of a good drummer in a particular kind of way. Maybe partly because of the way that he was a small guy swinging heavy sticks in order to be able to play loud, because the Beatles wanted him to play loud. The positioning of his percussive things within the beat was significant. Ringo had a thing where his kick hit first, and then hats and stuff hit, and then his snare came through real slowly. And that is very relevant to like heavy rock beats and stuff. He had a real good sense of taste for where stuff sat in the beat. He was the opposite of like a Chad Wackerman, where it's like a metronome and it's like a Seiko watch and it's all perfect and it sounds like a machine. Ringo was the opposite of that. His stuff felt right. His stuff gelled with the beat properly, and he was able to place the rhythmic things in the right places. And that's extremely important, and he also had good taste with regard to playing or overplaying or where he put beats and things in. He was real subservient to the other Beatles, but he was very important. Same kind of thing as Bonham. Bonham was also the tone master. He had a very different sound, but Bonham was also the placement of beats within the groove master. End of my coffee. So yeah, well, Logic is great if you have a Mac, but I repeat myself. There is that. And I've caught up with the scroll, and I've got something new popping up just now. Oh yeah, that was Ahmed brings up the funny quip. That's kind of along the lines of some of the stuff that I've said in Evergreen's podcasts about the most amazing creative artists aren't necessarily the nicest people. Sometimes it's literally kind of the opposite. Lennon was a mean guy, and a traumatized, sad, hurting guy with a lot of problems, and it took him a lifetime to get better at that stuff, which he did, which was amazing. But when the reporter asked if Ringo was the best drummer in the world, and he was like, Ringo's not even the best drummer in the Beatles. He was, of course, referring to Paul McCartney. I don't necessarily agree that McCartney was a better drummer than Ringo. He is presumably real good in a bunch of different ways. A very musical drummer. A lot of good things. It's not the same as being Ringo. So no, he wasn't necessarily, not even the best drummer in the Beatles, much less the best drummer in the world. But yeah, that hurt Ringo deeply, and Lennon didn't care at the time because it was funny, and it was like a little snipe. And yeah, Bo, the Let It Bleed is the next one that I have in mind, because it's an exceptional production. And when that happens, probably not next week, because again, I feel like somebody's asking for API Calypso. I feel like I can probably do that by next week. The next plugin in line is likely to be API Calypso, because I'm pretty sure that I can do that fairly straightforward, and it'll work and it won't be broken, and I can put it out. So that's probably coming next Sunday. So I may as well, and it'll keep plugins happening, and somebody's asking for it specifically. I feel like if I'm still recovering and somebody's asking for something that's not going to wipe me out trying to make it happen, it's an obvious call, so that'll happen. And then when I have another space and can skip another plugin, I can do Let It Bleed as an evergreens, because again, that stuff is better off when it's coming from me and it's something that I really want. And there's stuff that I have lots of resources about what the Rolling Stones were like in the studio and how they chose stuff. And in fact, there's Stanley Booth tells the story of what it's like being in the studio watching Keith Richards ride the volume on the guitar riff on like Midnight Rambler, which, yeah, Let It Bleed as Midnight Rambler. It's an amazing rock song. And that'll be coming too. But everybody chatted so fast that we scrolled right past Aiden's question, which I was going to attend to, namely, your opinion on trap music, dark undertone and orchestral elements. There's a number of things about that. One of the things is that trap music and earlier rap music is one of the things that happens when your arrangement and mixing techniques start going in one direction and not another. Like 80s and 90s sound gave us rap and trap music, because you could no longer do like Journey, lush arena-oriented rock. It all started sounding like toothpaste. It all sounded over-processed and was already over-processed. So you started having to do different stuff to be able to express things in arranged sound. Now, trap music is sparse and has very spiky, aggressive, percussive things going on that can be almost arbitrary. You get a lot of flexibility with what things you put in the beat and where. It's not like contrast to, say, drum and bass music and the placement of kick and snare. Drum and bass, kick and snare are very rigidly placed. Boom, 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 boom. It's a two-step kind of thing going on. And a genre-defining aspect of it is the positioning of the kick and snare. So some of that stuff, you get it with people exploring the arrangement around that stuff. And I'm going to have to look back to Mixyap, or that, or repost it. That's the easiest thing. Except it's like you passed my question too. Yeah, you're going to have to repost it, because if I scroll back, I'll never get back again now. And the trap music is more flexible than drum and bass, because drum and bass is too rigid a pattern, to the extent where I've never felt drawn to do any of it myself. I could do it effortlessly. I've got the technologies, I've got the sounds available. I could easily fire that stuff up. But it doesn't make it for me, because the definition of the drum parts are, on the one hand, they're not just four on the floor, they're not so primitive that they vanish, but then they're very rigidly defined. And if that's your jam, then it does vanish to you and you focus on all the other stuff. Trap, you could be placing a lot of things in a lot of different places. Like trap, you could easily have a kick pattern that's like dum, ba-da-da-da, dum, ba-da-da-da. You're probably going to have a consistent bar length. You're probably it's not going to be like odd time signatures or something, unless it is, because I don't think trap forbids that. And the sounds that you're using are kind of, the sounds of your percussion in trap music are like weapons. They hit, they hurt, they're really sharp, they're really aggressive. But in the space left behind, because they're not like arena rock, boom, boom. The aggressiveness of it lets you go to higher tempos. But then the space left behind it means that you can fill it in with other stuff. And one of the neat things about rap and trap music is that beat making could become just about anything. Like you could have orchestral chords, or you could have multiple chords that are clashing with each other. Like go back to, say, trip hop and Massive Attack, Blue Lines, for instance. Some of that early Massive Attack, which is another genre-defining thing, the trip hop, what it's bringing in that makes it feel very hip-hop, it makes it feel much rappier than it feels like rock or something, is because they're extensively using samples. I'm thinking of that key, the main song, their first big hit off of that, where and you've got these vocal samples going on. They're singing stuff. There's also chords in the background that are orchestral chords. And then you've got a bass, and if you re-listen to that, you'll notice the bass is not in tune with the orchestral chords. It's not like it's out of tune, that it's trying to do the same thing and failing. It's filling in an undernote that's completely other, that's completely else. And this collage, this juxtaposing of complete fabrics of music that are clashing with each other is very hip-hop. And that gives you a lot of freedom. That gives you a lot of freedom to make interesting moods in music, such as also in trap, where you can it's like the Zappa stuff, honestly. It's like that because if you're trying to make a mood and the mood is unsettling, ominous, something's wrong, somebody's not being helped, and bad things are happening, there's a lot of ways to do that. And some of them is like, okay, here's samples of one thing, here's samples of another thing, it's in a different key, I'm playing it over that anyhow. And then there's a harmonic tug between those things, and you can do that without knowing what you're doing. And you can also do that by knowing what you're doing and choosing to do it anyway. You'll get into interesting types of dissonance, interesting types of harmonic content more easily with like trap, hip-hop, Berlin techno, types of techno that are not melodic, that are not obeying a harmonic center, but they're designed around noises rather than designed around notes. And you do that kind of stuff, and there's a textural element that, like Zappa was very aware of, by the way, who the texture element can be easily ignored by like rock and pop bands. They're like, these are my guitars, this is my guitar sound, you're going to hear this every single time I play a song. It's neat. It's like the same thing as the drum and bass having that fixed boom bap, boom bap, boom bap, boom bap. It's like the drum and bass having the same drum pattern because that's the genre defining thing. If you have a rock band and your guitar sound is like thus and so, then you can choose it, and hopefully you come up with something like in the Rolling Stones, where the combination of their musicians gave rise to a bunch of good combined sounds that worked really well together, and so they just went and did that. but it's also a limiting factor. You don't necessarily take your rock band and then suddenly it's French horns and banjos. Now, before we run out of time completely, Mixup, when you have some time, can you talk about aliasing? There are plugins that can't adjust themselves to the project sample rate. If you can avoid aliasing, 44.1 is good enough, right? Well, aliasing is one of the reasons I work in analog for my stuff a lot. You can't always avoid aliasing. That said, aliasing is a factor of working with bright sounds. So one way of dealing with aliasing is to be running higher sample rates for stuff. In general, that's good. Upsampling is not always your friend. In fact, I would always recommend running at a higher sample rate in the project over running at a lower sampling rate and then routinely upsampling everything to avoid aliasing. I think you lose more than you gain. It depends, because again, the thing about aliasing, which will only happen through processing stuff in the digital domain, which is not automatically what you'll always do, is that it is a factor of bright sounds. Like, bass sounds typically aren't going to give you a lot of aliasing. Mellow sounds, aliasing is not the first thing on your mind. I often like dealing with sounds where there's a lot of depth. It feels like a big orchestration. There are things that sound like they're farther away. There are things that are like warm and mid-range or deep, and I'm not putting highs into those sounds. So they're not running into the problem of aliasing because they don't have highs to alias in the first place. When you do have highs in your mix, like say, if you know you're going to be digitally mixing and you're recording like a guitar, and you know this good, like let's say it's a heavy guitar, or you can say it's like a surf music guitar, it's real jangly and stuff. So you know you're going to be dealing with that as a potential problem. What you do is you record brighter, or you record as bright as you need. You sample into the DAW, you sample into your digital mix at the brightness level that you've got. You sample at the distortion level that you're going to need. And then when making, if you're trying to avoid aliasing and stuff, what you're going to do is take your DAW, take your digital mixing, take your digital plugins and all that kind of stuff, and you're typically going to avoid brightening stuff and distorting stuff more and making stuff slam more in the box. You're going to be doing different things that maybe might not do that so much. People will sometimes say, like, learn to cut stuff rather than boost stuff in digital. There are some things that I make. One of the things on my list of stuff that I must do is doing an update for energy so that I can call it Edge and make a plugin that's more accessible for hyping and brightening things. Now, Edge and Energy before it, which is the only one that exists at the moment because I haven't done Edge yet, Energy is full of digital artifacts, but in a kind of special way. It's doing that, it's working with the sample rate at sort of different gear ratios. So what it does is it gives you the capacity to throw lots of energy that is real spiky and direct, and you can hype up the amount of crunchiness and brightness and mid-range aggression in a sound that you wouldn't normally want to do. And using energy for that means that you're getting a kind of digitally sound, but it's not the same kind of digitally sound as if you were just going for digital distortions and high frequency boosts and stuff that'll give you lots of aliasing. Instead, using energy for that means it's a different sort of flavor of bright digital nasty aggressive, that can be helpful in some ways and gets you around having to do it in the ways that just straight up give you lots of aliasing. So yeah, the secret around aliasing is that digital will naturally be trying to do it, as well as truncation distortion. Everything that you do generates a little bit more of that unless it is handled. And with aliasing, ideally you're going to want to work at higher sample rates, and nothing will ever completely get rid of aliasing. There's always going to be some, you're just minimizing it. But your choices of capturing or generating stuff... Oh dear, my phone is going to be giving me an obnoxious thing. Here guys, check this out. Hear that? It's actually made kind of quiet. Oh man, I lose my mind over that stuff. I hate it. Random machines calling me to harass me and sell me things. It's the worst. I suppose I could unplug it or put it in another place in the house entirely. Oh, we'll see. You know, that's a good... Ahmed makes a good point. No pun intended. I'm writing down gentler point because that is one of the things I had in mind. It just wasn't on this list of things to do. So that'll fit in there. Because yeah, I do feel like point is a transient shaper, but it's sort of over flexible and can get you in big trouble and do terrible things. So I'll see about that. Merciful point. Oh God. And speaking of Airwindows Exciter, you should look into Energy. I'm pretty sure Energy has gone out. And I know I've done a version of that. And Energy is the closest you'll get to a Airwindows Exciter, in the sense of it hypes up like mid-range and mid-treble kinds of things in a characteristic way that doesn't work exactly like just EQs. It doesn't work exactly like standard EQs. So Energy is something I'm revisiting because I need to make something a little bit more accessible. But for the time being, what you've got in the arsenal is Energy as like a exciter type of thing. And with that, we lost a minute in that, but I always go over anyway, so we've gone over. It is 12:39. It's time for me to make some like nice... Oh, I should make ginger tea. I'm being told to drink ginger tea, and I can make it with my stevia and not put extra sugar in it and stuff, so that would be good. I should make some ginger tea. I will make ginger tea in honor of you guys wanting me to get better and recover. But that said, we are done with the live stream, and hopefully I've answered some questions. You can tell my voice is not best, but I'm getting better bit by bit. And if anybody has any last minute things, to a point anyhow, Second Sargassian is asking a question that I can't answer. Which genre would you say my majority of plugins work best on? They should work on all of the genres. There should be no restriction in genre of any kind, anywhere. And I'll catch up with you guys again tomorrow. I'll make ginger tea. And I'll catch up with you guys tomorrow, where I will be making music again. I've actually got a cool thing that I started doing just last week that I think worked really well, and I'll tell you my secret because I won't be necessarily talking that much while jamming. I've got all these chord organ things and stuff, and they're playing the chords and the bass and stuff. When I have time, I go and reprogram what the SD cards say, tell it to do different things. And last time I took one of them and I patched it through to a speaker in the room that doesn't go into the mix. It sneaks into the voiceover microphone a little bit. It doesn't go into the mix. And I tried that one because the idea was I can have my arrangement going where the chords aren't always happening. But if I have that happening, I can always hear what the chord is playing because it's playing basically as a drone in the simplest form. And it's showing me where the notes are. So if I start playing guitars or something along, I don't have to wait for the chord built into the mix to come through. I'm basically hearing the most primitive form of it, like just a chord organ being constantly played. And I did that last time, and even though I wasn't really well at the time, it was helping me hear where the notes were going, and the result was better. So I'll be doing that again. So what other plugins beside coils good for reducing audio sharpness? Average. You could use an average. You could use Baxandall. Baxandall is a great general purpose EQ. It's a bunch of stuff that you can use. And with that, I will bid you guys a good day. Let me start fooling with my, there we go. Oh, or no we don't. So I will bid you guys a good day. I'll see you next week. I'll be jamming tomorrow, and I won't be answering detailed questions, but I'll be able to talk back into the chat now that I've got a microphone for doing that. So I'll see you guys tomorrow, and I can respond to the music jam chat more than I used to. And then on Wednesday, we're getting together and doing the hanging out with my friends doing Minecraft. So if anybody is like needing more Chris in their life and you like playing games, you can jump on that or just come and watch it. It tends to run long, so that one tends to go like 3 to 5 hours because it's just hanging out playing video games. So I'll be doing that, and again, it's looking like API Clips is probably going to be doable for me as far as next Sunday. So there's another plugin coming, and I've got my little list of more things to work on, so we got that. Talk to you later.